Okay. Yeah? Okay. So when I first started to write, one of my first lines, it said, "I'm more of an Indian except for my chinky Tibetan face." And then later in Bombay, I wrote a poem called The Tibetan in Mumbai, in this book called Kora, in which I wrote this line. It says, "The Tibetan in Mumbai likes to flip through the midday, loves FM, but doesn't expect a Tibetan song."
Hello and welcome viewers. I think it would be more appropriate to say Tashi Delek. Tashi Delek viewers, we are here sitting in a cafe in Majnu Ka Tila, and I am sitting with renowned Tibetan poet, writer and activist Mr. Tenzin Tsundue. So we will try and find some windows which open into his life, and we'll try to look and understand the life of an activist, a writer and a poet, and of course when all these three combine in a single identity. So let's move on to the questions. So you entered Tibet secretly at the age of 22. So I would like you to tell us something about the memory of the Tibet you saw at that age, and now that your age is more than the double of 22. So has the memory faded, or it captures the mind with double intensity?
I remember very vividly what I'd seen, and more than that, what I'd undergone. It's a life-changing experience. Before going to Tibet, I used to dream about Tibet. And my parents, grandparents who came from Tibet, they used to tell us about Tibet. And for me, that Tibet was an idyllic Tibet, a Tibet where there is grasslands for kilometers together, and in the middle of that there are yak herders, Tibetan nomads and farmers. But of course I was also aware of what China has done to Tibet and all of that. But it was a romanticized Tibet that I'd always seen before going to Tibet. But after going to Tibet, my idea completely changed about the homeland that I dreamt of. So it was in 1997 when I went to Tibet. It was not a visit. It was not an act of tourism. It was my attempt to go to Tibet, take part in the freedom struggle, live among the nomads, maybe start a revolution. And it failed. I got arrested 5 days after walking into Tibet. I was handed over to security forces, who then blindfolded me, beat me up, tortured me, interrogated me for long hours. And I was lodged in prison for 3 months. If I'd known at the time that I was going to be in prison for 3 months or even 3 years, I wouldn't have minded. But I was kept under dark in uncertainty, and with this constant threat that I was going to be killed the next day. So there was fear of death every day, and that was most traumatizing moment I've ever lived in my life. So I remember very clearly of my sneaking into Tibet from Ladakh border, and then being arrested in Ngari, which the Chinese cannot say Ngari, so they say Ali, A-L-I, but it's actually the Ngari town, N-G-A-R-I, Ngari town. And then I was later taken to Lhasa. I was in Lhasa prison for 3 months. So all of that I remember very vividly, and I'm in the process of writing. So I'll write the entire story one day.
How was your time in prison? Does that inspire you to write?
Of course, I think prison experiences for anybody is always inspiring, because it's in prison where you, for the first time, reflect upon your own life, and that's one place where you have freedom to do what you want, and you have to follow rules all the time, and there's constant danger on your life, either sentenced or being tried. But not only that, even in India, I've been to jails so many times. Every time the Chinese Prime Minister or President, when they come to visit India, I'm the first one that the IB officers and the police collude, work together and trap me and put me in prison. So I've been to jail 16 times. So going to jail, whether it was the first time or even the 16th, it's always a moment to reflect. It's a moment to truly rejoice of what you had lived for. And it's always a moment of inspiration. And this is the one that makes you truly feel and value the life that is given to you. Not just freedom, just the opportunity to make sense of your life for yourself and for others. So it's always a great moment of reflection. And you are always inspired that when you go out from the jail, you would make better use of your life. I think it's every former political prisoners and a lesson from jail, and the lesson is that of freedom.
You said that you aim to start a rebellion, and you have mentioned somewhere that you idolized Bhagat Singh at that time. So how does this approach, the approach which is currently running of non-violence and the political approach, how does that go hand in hand with that idea?
For me, Bhagat Singh had always been that source of inspiration from childhood. I read firstly comic books of Bhagat Singh, and later his jail writings, where he said that every drop of my blood after my death will give rise to a new revolutionary. And this is so inspiring that he already knew that he is not going to see the freedom of India, but his, the generation that he nurtured was the one who saw freedom. And that's already such a large-hearted minds. I was always inspired by him, and that inspired me to, instead of protesting in India, go to Tibet, fight the good fight, and perhaps die. But it didn't work out for me. I was 22. So I was later thrown out of Tibet, and then I had to settle down for the second option, which is to work from exile. Working from exile requires different ways of working. It's not confrontation. It's symbolic in many ways. But at the same time, it was also a struggle for exiles. Firstly, for their very existence and maintaining the purpose of life, and then constantly working towards the imagination of free and independent Tibet that we are going to see in future, and yet not being able to go to Tibet and being there. There are so many challenges for an exile fighting for freedom. But I think for the younger generation today, for them, the challenge is that you had never seen Tibet. You cannot go there. At the same time, you cannot settle down in India or any of the Western countries. So you are nowhere. And I think that is the source of inspiration for younger generation Tibetans, that you understand you had been deprived to live in your country, and also the right to settle down or live anywhere else. So you constantly are feeling that it is this cause, it is this homeland, Tibet, which is my call, which is asking me to come and work for that homeland. So therefore, I feel that the just very idea of freedom is the biggest inspiration.
people tend to choose prose when they talk about reason and things they want to say. Even Bhagat Singh chose prose. What did you choose first, poetry or prose?
For me, it is always poetry. I think what had happened with my generation is we have to speak about Tibet, about which the entire world has no idea. So, common ordinary language or prose is not enough to talk about Tibet. We have to use the language of imagination to tell them the story of Tibet. So we speak in vocabularies of metaphors and imagery, and I think that worked in telling our story. At least we feel more satisfied that I've been able to tell our story of Tibet through poetry. And it was that time later, I've written this untitled poem about Majnu Tila, about just the Tibetans living in India. I wrote this poem. It says, I'm tired doing that 10th March ritual, screaming from the hills of Dharamshala. I'm tired selling sweaters on the roadside, 40 years of sitting on the roadside in dust and spit. I am tired eating rice and dal and grazing cows in the jungles of Karnataka. I am tired dragging my dhoti in the dirt of Majnu ka Tilla. I am tired fighting for the country I have never seen. So I started writing poetry from my university days. It is true that much earlier in school or even in college, I didn't have enough grasp of the English language in which I wanted to write and tell the story of Tibet internationally. So I think I took a lot of time just getting some hangover over the language, and much later I started to write. So you see, one of my first expressions was about identity. And because we were being constantly recognized as Chinky, Ching Chong, Jackie Chan brothers, which was kind of discriminatory, but at the same time it's also a larger reality that internationally no one knows about Tibet. So it was a struggle to tell the outside world that we are not just Ching Chong or Ping Pong or whatever. We are a Tibetan. We have a very, very strong culture. We have a deep-rooted history. And at the moment, China has occupied Tibet, and the international community, entire international community, including India, are busy trading with China and reaping benefits out of the suffering of Tibet. And this is so very painful that you have not only lost the independence of Tibet, other communities, countries are taking advantage of you and they do not know. And this is most painful and it's frustrating.
Life of the Tibetan people revolves more around the past and the imagination of future, and the present just remains a connection between these two. How do you see the relationship between these three?
What did it say?
The life of the Tibetan people revolves more around the past and the imagination of the future, and the present just remains a connection between these two. How do you see the relationship between these three entities?
I do not, categorically separate the past and the future. The past is the present, and how we are living is because of our past. And so there is constant need to go back to the past and refer to the past to understand the present. And the future is, of course, is our dream to see a free and independent Tibet. But without working now, there will be no future for us. There is a dream of a free and independent Tibet, but just dreaming is not enough. We have to be practical and work towards independence every day.
Moving on to a very abstract question, how do you see India in general, not in political terms?
It's an odd question for you to ask, because I ask the same question to you, because I'm born in India, educated here, and जो इंडिया मुझे दिख रहा है वही है जो तुम दिख रहे हो. So therefore I feel odd that you are asking me how do I look at India. I do not look at India in any different way. And this is, I feel, as belonged to India as anybody, as any Indians are. हाँ, ये फ़र्क है कि as a Tibetan refugee, I'm not a citizen of India, although I'm born and brought up here.
How do you feel that belonging?
So for me, the belonging here in India is the culture, is the identity, and in fact, whatever I'm talking about is from India. My education is Indian, my English accent is Indian, everything is Indian for me. And therefore, when I go to foreign countries, of course, I say I'm Tibetan, but I'm also Indian. So in that way, for me, India is not a foreign country. It is as a homeland, as I aspire for Tibet.
It's good to hear that. Can you tell us something about your opinion on India's Tibet policy?
India's Tibet policy, unfortunately, even today is being guided by colonial British policies, even today. So there are these perspectives which are historical based, and India continues to practice what the British left behind as British legacy. And the British legacy was about building Britain's colonial powers in Asia, and India should now liberate herself from that perspective, because India's perspective over China and Tibet are different, and it has to be different, because India does not aim to further expand its territory like how the British dreamt of doing that. British Empire was a colonial empire, so their ambition was expansionist, just like how Modi ji describes China as Vistarvad. So, but then our policy even today towards China, towards Tibet, is the same. That the Britishers left behind. So India's border agreement on Arunachal is different from India's border agreement on Sikkim, which is different from India's border agreement on Ladakh. And in Ladakh and Sikkim, India looks at the treaties India signed with Manchu Empire, who was giving protection to Tibet. But in Arunachal Pradesh, the border was signed between British Empire and Tibet directly. And it's very clear that Tibet was a protectorate under the Manchu rule. It didn't mean that Tibet was part of China. So, but then because British, for them, their policy was to placate Tibet on one side and China on the other side, and divided Tibet into inner Tibet and outer Tibet, and that hugely complicated perspective. And India is still continuing those kind of policies, and which should be decolonized.
Do you feel words come out to be enough, and do you think writing has helped you in achieving what you really envisioned when you started this journey?
Writing can be better every time, and whenever you finish a poem or an essay or a story, and after some time when you revisit, there are a lot of changes you would wish, and sometimes you would wish you could recall all the books. Like how companies, Mercedes, BMW, they recall their models of certain period of production and say something has gone wrong. They can recall, but writers cannot recall all the writings. So of course, there is constant revisit of your own writing, and one always gets a little better. But it also means that your opinion is also changing, your craftsmanship is also changing.
Who were the first poets and writers who inspired you?
I started from Khalil Gibran, a Lebanese Syrian poet from school time, and he was someone I read both as a revolutionary poet and also as a romantic poet. His writings, although at the time when I was in school, I didn't realize that it was all translations, and much later I got to know. But then his writings were beautiful. The book, The Prophet, Spirit Rebellious. So I think these are wonderful writings that even today I treasure. I started from school, and later, of course, I read Arun Kolatkar, Dilip Chitre, Indian writing. A.K. Ramanujan is one of my favorites. But from American writings, I think Robert Frost is one of my favorites. Yeah, and E. Cummings, Neruda, these are some of my favorites.
Do you also write in Tibetan and all?
I can write, but it doesn't come out well in the way satisfactory in the way I write English. So I think today generations, both Tibetans and also among Indians, we seem to be placed in many languages that we may be comfortable speaking our own mother tongue, but when it comes to more intellectual writing or reading language, it's for me at least it's English, and for others it may be different other languages.
So I'm done with the questions, but do you want to share something to the viewers? Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think as a Tibetan writer, for me, what I'm seeing is that we are in a moment of transition. We are ourselves dealing with the modernity on one side, and also having to take up the cause of Tibet on the other side. For a long time, India looked at Tibet as a kind of a spiritual place and nothing more than that. But Tibet is the most strategic partner and neighboring country for India. India and Tibet share a border of almost about 4,500 kilometers from Ladakh to the last southeastern part of Arunachal bordering Burma, all that. And tomorrow, when Tibet regains as a free and independent country, it's going to be such a long unending border for India, and it'll be great if India could invest its politics in Tibet, because inevitably, eventually Tibet is going to be free and independent, and therefore we would share a much more cordial relationship, and it's only after the independence of Tibet that India can truly look at the Himalayas with a sense of relief. Otherwise, the tension and the anxiety that China has created on the Himalayan border is a problem for both the local people in the Himalayas, and not only Indian Himalayas, but also in Nepal and Bhutan. And therefore there's no real sense of peace in the Himalayas. There was a point of time in the history where Indians used to go across the Himalayas so very casually with great sense of freedom, and Tibetans also used to come right up to Banaras, Bodh Gaya for pilgrimage, and Indians used to go up to Kailash Mansarovar. Today, every Indian who's crossing the Himalayas going to Kailash Mansarovar ke darshan, they have to pay at least about 1 lakh rupees just as a way of donation to the Chinese government. So these are different challenges. So I feel that kind of free and independent Tibet, I feel with which we can recreate Tibet and India as a brotherly relationship, as a neighboring country.
Thank you so much. It was a really beautiful and insightful conversation.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for giving
Okay.
us this time and sharing this. Thank you.